Hello, everyone, and welcome to another Bluecoat Talk presented by Science North. Before we get started, I'd like to acknowledge that we are on traditional and ancestral lands of the Attigmishing, Anishinaabe, and Wanapitani First Nation. We would also like to acknowledge the Métis Nation for their cultural and economic contribution in this area. These lands sit in the Robinson-Huron Treaty Area, and as we are all treaty people, it is important for us to all be thinking about what treaty area we live in and are an active part of. Let's take a moment to appreciate the land that we are on by acknowledging the traditional treaty and treaty area you are located in. And we have a very special guest with us today. We have Dr. Aaron Langille, who will be telling us about app and game development. Hello, Aaron. Thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule to be with us today.
No problem. I'm glad to be here.
Aaron is a professor of computer science and video game design and is a professor and coordinator of game design at Cambrian College. And he is also a regular columnist on CBC Morning North. So today, Aaron, we're going to be talking about game design, app development, and all the things that entails in terms of a career in the science field.
Excellent. I'm ready.
So like a lot of STEM fields, this is one that's growing quickly and is one that's really being highlighted by a lot of young students coming up. I know several friends who are in computer science or in game design app development themselves. So in terms of a game design or app development course, what are some of the things that you might go over or learn in the course?
That's a really good question because there are actually so many things involved. A lot of time people just associate computer programming with app and game development, but there's actually quite a number of skills. So if we kind of break them apart, they're very related. Apps and games, they just kind of differ in their purpose, apps being more productive and games being a little bit more entertainment driven. But they have components that range from computer coding. In terms of games, you have things like story, you have graphics. Graphics can also be very applicable in app development as well. Most people don't like to open up an app that doesn't look very nice or is hard to use because it's been poorly developed in terms of its visuals. There are things that we call UI UX, which stands for user interface, user experience, which can be another skill that would be developed in an app or a game program, where you are actually thinking about the user. Should I place this button right in the middle? Should I put it at the bottom or at the top? Switching back to games for a second, there's also the mechanics. How do I make my character jump? How do I make them slide and run? So it's actually both app and game development have a wide variety of skills on top of the computer coding. So both of them will have some aspect of computer coding. How much computer coding kind of depends on what you're using to develop your app or game. So I might say app a couple of times when I mean apps and games, and I might say games a couple of times when I mean games and apps, but they are pretty interchangeable in a lot of respects. There are a lot of programs out there now that help to make app and game development easier. We usually call them engines. So an app development engine or a game engine, they will kind of take some of the more tedious things that we used to have to do, like lining things up and making sure that things work absolutely perfectly. They will take over some of those more tedious things and allow you to focus on things like, what is my color scheme going to be? How am I going to have the best possible game or app experience for my user? So there are a handful of things that you would learn in a game or an app development program. And there's a number of tools that you might use as well to help make it a little bit easier for you to get your job done.
So a field like this really is a marriage, so to speak, of both a technical point of view and a creative one. And it's a great way of showing that science can be very creative. We don't always think of it that way, but there's absolutely a creative aspect to pretty much any type of science, and especially one like this.
For sure.
It's also something that's, yeah.
Yeah, no, I was just going to say, you're absolutely right. There's in the game design program at Cambrian, for example, there are courses that are very much focused on the creative elements, whether or not it's story or aesthetics, sort of the visuals. And then there are technical courses, and app development runs the same way. So it is both app and game development are really close blending of creativity and technical scientific aspects as well. So absolutely correct.
And this is something that's especially when we look at apps, although for people like me, certainly games as well, it's something that's just in every aspect of our life. I mean, we're using an app seemingly all the time. We're using apps to stream this right now, and we've got a number of apps on our phone, and it's something that's changed so much in the last even 10 years, let alone sort of 15 or 20. It's something that's just evolved so rapidly. So how has this field changed over the last, say, 10 years?
I think there's a couple of things that have kind of pushed where apps and games have gone. Certainly, mobile phones have been huge. You know, my phone that I use quite often during the day is hundreds and hundreds of times more powerful than my first handful of computers combined. And so, you know, in a way, I don't want to push this too far, but in a way, we're kind of living in that Star Trek era where we have these small, super powerful portable computers with us all the time, and sort of with that change in technology. Came a change in how we see our software. So our software being the things that we run on these devices. And so I think the rise of mobile devices has, and the popularity of mobile devices has certainly had a huge impact on both games and app development. You know, games like Angry Birds, for example, which was hugely popular when mobile phones were first starting to come out. Plants vs. Zombies is another one that I can think of. Those games wouldn't have made as much sense on traditional computers or consoles. And I know you can play them there now, but they really sort of grew into this phenomenon because of the mobile devices. So I think that is definitely a turning point in app and game development. I think another turning point was opening up the app stores. So whether or not, you know, regardless of what device you're using, there's a store for the applications. And I think opening those up to allow pretty much everyone that had the interest of publishing, of creating their own game or creating their own app, also had a huge impact, because what this did is it took what was largely the control of software from big corporations and put it sort of in everybody's hands. So if you had a great idea for, again, game or app or anything else, you were able to publish that yourself. And that allowed a lot more ideas to be developed, and a lot more games that people wouldn't have seen otherwise became really popular, really big hits, and a lot of apps that people didn't realize they needed kind of came from individual developers that said, I think I would really use an app like this, and I'm going to make it available to other people, whether it's for free or for sale. And then all of a sudden, these become things that we now use every day. So I think mobile phones were a really big thing, and I think opening up the app stores to everybody also helped to shape this idea that we have of apps and games.
Without putting you on the spot or aging you too much, do you remember what the first computer you owned was?
I do. It was a 386 SX25. So it was an IBM clone. They were called clones at the time because it wasn't an official IBM machine. Its designation was a 386. So that meant that it was after the 286s and before the 486s. And it was an SX25, which means that it didn't have the math coprocessor on it. And that's just a really fancy term for saying it couldn't do math as well as other computers. So yeah, I remember vividly because I had to save up for it myself. So it's definitely in my archives up here. Yeah.
Yeah, that's I'm fairly glad I didn't have to deal with those type of computers. Game design, app development, these are all really quickly growing fields. There are a lot of young people, I'm sure, watching and who are getting into these fields, who are wanting to pursue this. What type of advice would you have for someone who's following this career path? What type of higher education should they pursue?
Also, really good question. So there's a handful of ways to look at game and app development. What I would do if there's still time, if you're in high school, I would try to get into a couple of technical classes. So I would get into a lot of times the high schools will teach about app software, like just using app software. So just make sure that you're comfortable with all different kinds of software. A lot of people are now, just because of using their phones so frequently. And I would also try, if your high school offers a coding class, I would try that out as well. Because if you don't like it at that level, you might not like it at the higher education level either, like when you get into college or university. So I would, if you have the chance, try it in high school. If your high school doesn't offer any courses, take a look online, because there are a lot of really useful self-learning things that you can follow. So for example, the programming language Python has a really extensive tutorial that you can follow and learn quite a bit about Python, which is a really good language to learn before Java or C++. So if you're interested, again, maybe play with some of these languages on your own before you have to make a big decision in higher education. If you decide that this is something that you like, and if you have no experience and you simply want to try it out and you're getting ready for college or university, take a look at what programs they offer. So a lot of universities will offer computer science, which is very much programming focused. Some universities are starting to offer game design as well, or app design particular streams. So take a look at and see if where you're applying has those. And this is the same for the college level as well. Take a look at what they have to offer. Try to decide what you think is most interesting for you. So since I'm from Sudbury, I'm not plugging these programs in particular. I just want to give you an idea. Laurentian University, for example, has a computer science program with a game design specialization. And also a web data management specialization. So the first 2 years of those 4-year programs are very similar. And then as you go on in your university career, you pick which specialization you want. And a lot of universities do this as well. Cambrian College has programs now in game design, and Internet of Things, and in app development, and in other areas as well. And those programs range anywhere from 2 to 3 years, depending on the options. So it really kind of pays to take a moment and look at what is available to you and think about what you will have the most fun with. I'm always surprised when people say, I'm not really interested in games. It's kind of hard for me to understand that, because I am so interested in games. But there are people that aren't really that interested in either playing games or developing games. So an app development course might be better for them. And conversely, there are people that don't really want to design productivity apps, like apps to write letters or to write essays or to do your financial calculations, and would be happier doing games. So I strongly recommend that you take a quick look at what is available, and sort of decide from there. And something else to keep in mind, and I don't want to throw my higher education advisor hat on here for too long. It is also possible in most institutions to change if you find that you're not in the right program. Talk to an academic advisor and say, hey, can I switch to this program instead? So don't worry too much about making the wrong decision, because a lot of times there are ways for you to move around and to see what you might like.
I think that's great advice for a lot of different fields as well, is that the people at your high schools and your colleges and your universities do want to help you, and they want you in the best program they can. So yeah, always be talking to people. In my far more limited experience, most of the people I know who are interested in this field just played around on their own computer and just started making their own things just from scratch. And you make a ton of mistakes, but that's how you learn a lot too. So that's from sort of an education point of view. Then from a more career or perhaps business point of view, what are some challenges that are facing young developers as they're entering the field?
Let me think about that for a moment. I think, and again, it sort of depends on which direction you're coming from. I actually think that there is a large demand, particularly for app developers right now. I'm gonna focus on app developers in specific, and one of the reasons for this, and being, can't believe I'm going to say this on kind of a live stream, being in the industry for as long as I have been, and it's quite a while, I've managed to see a lot of trends. So for example, when I first started, or when I graduated from computer science long time ago, really only big companies were hiring computer scientists. So that's not to say that there weren't a lot of jobs. It's just you had to go to fairly specific employers. Now we're finding that a lot of medium and smaller sized businesses have interest in having a computery person on their staff working with them. So we find now that the industry is actually opening more than it was before, which is pretty cool because computery stuff has always been a pretty open industry in terms of lots of availability for jobs. So having said that, a lot of people are looking to hire app developers in particular. In Sudbury, for example, where we are, there are a lot of industries that are very much focused on technology. And a lot of those industries, while they may not be app developers in the title of their business, they want to have an app developer working with them so that they can offer this really cool app that shows off their products, whatever it might be. Game design is a little bit different, but I think I'm going to try to approach this carefully and say game development has a little bit has somewhat fewer jobs than general app development from companies looking for game developers, but I think has more interesting opportunities for people to work on their own or in small groups as independent developers. There's a really big push for independent game developers in terms of having the creativity and the flexibility to kind of work on their own and to publish their own interesting things. Now, I don't want to give the impression there aren't game design jobs, are there? They're out there. There certainly are, but they tend to be more concentrated in the larger cities. But definitely talk around if you're interested in game design. Talk to people that are in your community. Ask them if anybody's doing game design in your community, and sort of gauge whether or not there's gauge sort of the level of opportunity that's around you. A lot of companies are starting to look at game design as an alternative to old education styles. So, for example, a lot of companies are looking to modernize how they teach people different skills, and they're looking at games. So, there's a lot of opportunities for game designers as well to get involved in sort of adjacent industries or industries that are kind of side by side with what other people might be doing. So the challenges are sort of finding the right job for you and finding the right place for you to go. They're far from impossible challenges, but I would say that that's probably the thing that you're going to look at. You're going to want to look at as you're getting ready to graduate is where are you going to want to apply these skills, and how can you sort of make yourself a little bit more visible to these employers so that you get that interview.
And every year there are tons of incredibly successful games that come from small developers. It's not always the big guys. I mean, games like Among Us was a pretty small developer. More indie hits like Disco Elysium a couple years ago. Like these are all things that aren't necessarily the sort of the big studios, but yeah, you can definitely work independently.
Well, Minecraft started as an independent game.
Yeah.
There are so many examples of games that started off with one or two or a half a dozen people, and in time, I'm always a little bit careful to say don't expect your first game to be the most popular game of the year, but in time, as your skills develop and as you develop a following for people that like the kinds of games that you produce, there are more and more opportunities for you to make a name for yourself and make a career.
Yeah, and I would think, correct me if I'm wrong, but I would think almost all of these skills are very applicable in a whole bunch of different fields, be it from the technical standpoint or the creative one. I mean, design is a huge field right now in all sorts of different things.
Absolutely, there's no question. The skills that you are learning as a game designer have a big overlap with the skills that you would learn as an app designer. Both of those have a big overlap with general computer sciencey stuff and technical things. So if you decide that you want to work in information technology or work in biology and do these kinds of things on the side, absolutely. There's all kinds of what we would call transferable skills that would allow you to do all kinds of jobs that you would enjoy, and then pick away at these things either as hobbies at first. There's lots of ways to mix and match the things that you like.
Yeah, and having, again, far less experience than you, but having taken a design class myself, you mentioned earlier the things like where the buttons are, where the sort of back button is, and the enter button. Those things take a long time to perfect and figure out, even things as simple as that. Like, there are so many steps that go into things like design that, yeah, having these skills are things that will take you far in a lot of different fields.
Yeah, and
for people, yeah,
that's part of the point I was making earlier, that these kinds of skills are now being sought by more and more companies. So those kinds of design skills, whether or not you end up working in app design or game design, those kinds of design skills are very valuable for sure.
So for those who maybe aren't as familiar with this field, or perhaps the sort of starry-eyed people who are excited but don't know too much, what are some of the more bigger misconceptions of the field? What do people assume that aren't necessarily true?
Well, I think the big one, and I kind of touched on this before, is don't expect your first app or game to kind of take off and have 100 million downloads and just have money rolling in every direction. You need to be patient. A lot of times people end up doing this, not so much to sell an individual app, but to work on a team. So the other thing, another misconception, is that you're always working alone when you're doing these kinds of jobs. And that's absolutely not true. Certainly there are opportunities to be a solo developer. So if you're the kind of person that likes to keep their own company and to work alone because of the flexibility and the creative decisions that you can make, there are opportunities to work that way. But a lot of times you actually work in a team of people that are all sort of working towards the same goal. So it is a common misconception that it's kind of a lonelier career, but it doesn't have to be that way at all. There are lots of team development activities that happen depending on where you get employed. There's also opportunity, if you're a solo developer, to network with other people. So maybe you don't have all of the skills that you need to do your solo project, and you need to talk to an artist, for example, or a user interface expert. There are lots of opportunities for you to talk and work with other people. So I think those are probably the two, is to have realistic salary goals in mind. And it can take a lot of practice to get really good at app development and game development before you see a lot of people sort of investing in what you're working on. And it isn't really that lonely, and it isn't really an area where you have to work with lots of people either. So there are lots of opportunities to sort of mix and match with what you are comfortable with. And that's one of the important things, is if you are thinking about doing this for a career, is to kind of look into what opportunities are available and finding the right one that fits with the way that you work best.
A reminder to those watching on either Facebook or YouTube that if you have any questions, you can put them in the comments and we will see them, and we'll make sure to ask Aaron these questions. And we have one from Renata, which is, how does the field of game development look like in Canada specifically? And is there a particular part of the world that is sort of the hub for this field?
So game development in Canada is pretty big. It's kind of a big deal. We are, there's a number of countries that are good at it, but I like to be proud of what we accomplish with game design in Canada. We do some pretty interesting things. There are a number of studios from Canada, and you can certainly look this up online, sort of There are Wikipedia pages devoted to the game industry in Canada. The game industry in Canada does reach into the billions of dollars of revenue for all sorts of reasons, sales and development. But Canada is very, very active in game design. And I want to be a little bit careful here. Again, there are many times that I kind of pause and say, how do I want to say this the best way? Most of the game development does happen in major centers like Vancouver, Montreal, and Toronto. So it's like a lot of industries that are kind of focused where large groups of people are. But that is not at all to say that there isn't game design happening out of those areas as well. There definitely is. There are smaller studios that are happening, between those urban centers, and there are individuals and small pairs and triplet teams that are working across the country. So it's definitely more concentrated in the big cities, but certainly not limited to the big cities in any way.
Do you find that there's going to be growing niches in areas like, say, Sudbury, because this is one of the more creative fields when we talk about STEM, and STEM is science, technology, engineering, and math, and this is one of the more creative of those fields that you can put your own stamp on, you put your own personality. So is there going to be people looking for games and apps that are closer to where they live and have that cultural identity?
I think so. I actually think Canada has a fairly specific cultural identity on its games already. It would be nice to see smaller cities like Sudbury have more of an impact in that area. I do think it's coming. It's easy to say, well, hey, you're from there, so it's easy for you to talk about it. But I think Sudbury has an opportunity to do really well. And if there's one thing that the pandemic has shown us, it's that we can work in a variety of locations in a variety of ways. So there's absolutely no reason to think that Sudbury can't really excel in game design. And one of the things that I will be working with my colleagues in higher education and beyond and in industry is to sort of develop and grow that community. Now, whether or not you'll be playing games in the next couple of years that feature the Big Nickel in the background or the Science North Snowflake, I can't say for sure. But I do think there's lots of opportunity for development teams to put that local spin. When you grow up in Sudbury or in Northern Ontario, there's something reassuring about including the things that you grow up with in the art that you're creating. So again, there are ways to even do that with an app, and definitely ways to do that in games as well.
We have Julie Lynn that was asking about Kitchener.
I don't know that I have anything specific. I think I kind of maybe incorrectly kind of lump Kitchener in with the Toronto area. Certainly there's a lot of tech activity in Toronto, Waterloo, Kitchener, and I think that Kitchener, Waterloo, there's a lot of great technical work that's coming out. I don't know if I could point to any particular aspects, like any particular highlights that come into games from that area, or from apps, but definitely there is a very thriving development community, computer programming, app development, and game design coming out of Southern Ontario, including Kitchener, for sure.
Do you know of any, or can you give examples of apps or games that are Canadian made that people may not realize are Canadian?
Ooh, that's on the spot.
Off the top of your head right now, having not prepared, go.
Games and apps. Ubisoft is based in Montreal, so certainly the games coming from there. When I'm teaching game design, I talk in my classes about a group of individuals from Vancouver that actually lived together for a period of time. They called themselves Indie House, and sort of each individual or pair from this sort of game design community from Indie House has gone on to publish games. It's actually been really cool to see. So one of the games that I play in class is called Towerfall Ascension, and it's a really fast paced sort of a bow and arrow game, and that's Canadian, and we play that all the time in class when we talk about how games look and how they play and the mechanics of them, but also what's come out of that particular group of individuals is a game called Chicory that was just released, and it's a very beautiful coloring game where you have to paint the world that you're in, and another one that just came out that has extraordinary representation in its characters called Eichenfell. So there's a very particular purpose to the games that came out of this unique space, and that was to create games that sort of represented everybody. And they did what I think is a pretty good job, and the games are really fun. So other than that, there's games that are set in Canada. The Long Dark is one that some people might be familiar with. Scott Pilgrim versus the World is certainly set in Toronto. There are occasional flashes of Canadian spaces that go by in, I think there's an Assassin's Creed game that has a particular setting from, might be Montreal. Please don't quote me on that. It's been a long time since I looked this stuff up, but yeah, we do pop up every now and then, and it's kind of cool when it happens.
Yeah, always good to see Canadian representation. And if you want to see more, I mean, the future is here. Now is the time to go and make your own mark if you're looking to get into this field and do something uniquely Canadian. And you've sort of then touched on that a little bit, but I'll keep you going into it. Is there any particular examples of really good development that you've seen recently?
I guess thinking from the app side of things. I think there's a lot of high quality apps. I think a lot of user interfaces are changing. So I think what we're seeing is a shift. And again, this goes back to kind of what we talked about at the beginning. So if you've come in late, I'll just quickly recap. There's a lot of tools out there that sort of make app and game development a little bit easier, so that you don't have to focus on the tiny technical details, but you can focus on sort of making a good interface for your user. I think what we're seeing now is a lot more attention to those kinds of things, like how can I make this enjoyable for my user so they don't have to press 40 buttons to get to where they need to go. You see a lot of dark mode options now, so that when people are using their phones in low light situations, they don't have that brilliant white light in their face. And actually, it's not trivial to do. So we think it's easy for us to think like just change all the colors and turn it into a dark mode. But there's a science to it. There's a science to taking all of the colors and inverting them more or less, but also making sure that people can still read things. It's you want to make sure that people of all levels of vision ability and whatnot can still use the app properly if you're going to change all of the colors. So there's a lot more focus on that going, and I'm seeing that more as a trend. I won't pick on any particular developer or app, but you do see that there's a lot more effort going now that we're really good at sort of the technical aspects of app and game design. We're seeing a lot more attention to the human aspects of, how can I ensure that whatever my user happens to be using, game or app, that they are comfortable and that they're not sort of fighting with the design decisions that I've made.
Yeah, accessibility is very important these days, and I think that we take a lot of it for granted. I always assume dark mode, just make it black, it's easy. And it's almost unfair, because most of the time we talk about design in our personal lives is because we have found something that annoys us and we want to talk bad about it. But I encourage people to, the next time you're using an app or you're playing a game, look for the type of things that you really like and point those out and give credit where it's due. We're running close on time here, so I will get you out on one more question that I think you're gonna like. I know on your arm you've got some great gaming tattoos, so if you would like to show off some of those tattoos and also some of the guns that you're hiding behind that shirt.
I'll keep it fairly limited. I have spent a bit of time sort of putting some of my favorite games as tattoos. I don't know. Everything's backwards on my screen, so I'm kind of struggling here.
We got Boo and a mushroom there.
We've got a level up mushroom or a 1-up mushroom. We've got the Mario Ghost. We've got it's hard to see down here, but we've got Asteroids, which I would have played on a VIC-20. I was telling a group of students yesterday that when I started playing games, a lot of them were loaded off of an audio cassette. Now, that's a hard thing to describe to people because a lot of my audiences don't know what an audio cassette is. So not only am I sort of dating myself, but I'm also using technology that has been out of style for a really, really long time. So it is kind of funny, but they sort of range. I've got Space Invaders somewhere. I've got a blue mushroom somewhere. I've got Zelda Hearts. And I think for me, what these images represent is sort of the history that I have with games that sort of remind me that and this will also kind of circle back to when we were talking about how transferable these skills were. I was playing games when I was probably about 10 years old, certainly not 10 anymore. So that was a long time ago. But those game experiences are actually what brought me directly to computer science, more or less. I had it in my head that since I liked games, I would also like computer science. And I was also more or less correct. But it would be another 10 years for me before I came back to being able to teach and talk about games professionally. And there's been a much more open environment to talk about games now than there was when I was looking at going into high school or university, where games were more often labeled just a waste of time or a distraction. Now we're starting to see some very powerful uses for games when they're done properly. So it's been it's been very interesting to watch parents come up to me as a higher education recruiter and have them say, will you teach my kid how to design video games, because that's what I really want for them. So it's been a really interesting change. And app development goes hand in hand. Like I'm in no way trying to keep app development out of the conversation. App development has come along in exactly the same way. So when you think about how popular apps like TikTok, it's easy for me to say TikTok and then immediately reach out to the parents in the audience and say Facebook and Twitter. Instagram is another one that'll catch a broad audience. Like those apps are so popular and so much planning and design goes into those the same way that it would go into a game. So they're really not that different. And to have people come to a higher education fair or even to a high school open house and say, can you teach us how to do some of these things is absolutely phenomenal to see, because that certainly wasn't around when I was going into high school and university and or college, but it's an amazing thing to have available now. So are there some things to look out for? Yes, definitely look into the programs that are available where you're planning to go. Take a look at what's available at high school and at university or college. And then as you're preparing to graduate, pay attention to the job market where you are and where you're willing to relocate to. But there's a lot of cool jobs out there, and there's a lot of things that you can even just do on your own. So it's a really, really exciting place to be.
I was going to ask you what got you into this, and then you kind of answered that for me. So well done on that. And yeah, like any field, it's a lot of hard work, but also a lot of opportunities.
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you so much for your time. That was Dr. Aaron Langille. He's the professor and coordinator of game design at Cambrian College. He is a regular columnist on CBC Morning North, and he rocks a sweet beard. So thank you so much for your time, Aaron. Pleasure to have you on here.
Perfect. Take care.
Yes, take care. And everyone watching, thank you for watching. We'll have more Bluecoat Talks and more in the future. Keep an eye out on our social media at Science North on Instagram, Twitter. We've got TikTok as well. Follow us everywhere you can. And thank you all for listening today.